Yeah, sure. My name is Austin Mullen. Currently, I work as a visual designer slash motion designer. I'm currently employed at a staffing agency for creative work called Creative Circle. And that's basically, they give me work into various different places right now. I've worked at a couple of agencies so far, and I finished a contract with one of them as of this week. So I'm on my next one next week. So that's what I'm doing currently. That's a good question, and it's something that I'm still trying to answer because I've been beginning to become more open about it. Um, and I guess the best way to kind of describe it is that it's kind of a double-edged sword. A double-edged sword. I notice I have greater proficiency in certain areas at work than initially expected. But I never really attributed it to being neurodivergent or having like a certain condition. It was definitely I was more focused on like practice improvement instead. Um, and that's kind of related to how I kind of like grew up. I definitely wasn't as proficient in other skills growing up, like speaking and speech, which sometimes I still have trouble with. Uh, and I think there's also an issue to consistently performed at a high level or fit a certain mold.
Mm.
Um, but with those, notions in mind, I've always had like a heightened attention to detail, ability to notice and address problems, which kind of stems from being problem averse. So like there's a benefit, but like there's also like a disadvantage to it as well. Um, but being aware of my strength has led to mindfulness and starting new projects. Usually when I start like a new project with a client, I like to ask them like as much as possible, like what is the purpose of this project? Who's your target demographic? What type of style do you want? And the more info I have, the more comfortable I am in making a product that totally satisfies them. And it has worked for me multiple times. Um, so yeah, my answer is always changing. So that's my current way of how I feel currently. That's a good question. Other identities. Again, it kind of has to like do with like how I grew up. I definitely grew up in a more traditional leaning area, which presented challenges due to like different interests and active differences. I went to a special education preschool and later attended a public school with an integrated special education program. Um, and for those reasons, I was very, self-disciplined. I was really focused on like solving challenges independently and still asking for help as a skill to improve upon, um, because that's how I was self-perceived.
Mm.
I always felt like I kind of needed to do more of what I was able to do. Um, and while that's a really good worth ethic, the motivation underneath isn't, I wouldn't say it's 100% healthy because it's also driven by a source of stress. It's driven by concerns about others people's perceptions. And, kind of looking back now, I kind of wished I had a more relaxed approach to these situations, looking at where I am currently and what my outlook is going to look like in my career and my future. Um, I also think that, going to college in a very diverse area like Drexel, which is on campus in Philadelphia, has also allowed me to kind of develop not only like emotional intelligence, but like cultural intelligence, which I think are really beneficial skills in workplace and other humanitarian efforts. Like for me, I also do event organizing through DiVertical, which organizes events for people on the spectrum, and I also do like other research work for that. I, hired research analysts to work with and create like, focus groups and surveys to kind of get more consensus of what people need and such. And I think that's also very helped with me making my decisions, both in humanitarian work, but also a potential um, skill to be used in professional work. So that's basically how like my identities growing up kind of molded it into my professional identity now. Um, I guess attention to detail, focus. Yeah, focus is kind of a huge thing because I don't want to say I'm quiet, but I do more than I do talk, which is actually a very beneficial thing. Um, because that kind of allows me to kind of get more stuff done when, I get something from like a manager saying, hey, I need you to do this. I automatically do it unless I have like questions to ask, which kind of help with the project. Um, and I think that's a really beneficial skill to have. Um, I also think that, as someone who's had different ways of communicating with different people and such, um, it's also helped me learn how to adapt to others people's environments, understanding like their communication language, their work ethics, their expectations for like projects and such. Um, and I think my ability to, learn how to communicate with other people growing up and learning how to communicate with different people has also contributed to that. That I'm also a visual learner, which from that, I like to present things visually. And I think from my past experiences, the best projects that I've had that, successful clients, managers were really happy about, were ones where they had like the most visual evidence. Like an example would be an activation where we made like a lot of concepts, a lot of visual concepts of what something would look like in real life. Because if you didn't really have any of those, like, physical evidence, it's harder for, clients and managers to think of the project they had in mind without any like visual imagery. So I think, having that experience and turning that into a skill is also beneficial. That's a good question. I'll start with, I think the big thing is learning how to like build relationships and such. Because, professional relationships are very different from like personal friendships in real life and like family relationships and so forth. Um, because like networking, there's networking and then there's using your network for other things. And that's the networking part is kind of hard to harvest because you have so many people that you want to connect with, but you can't really connect with them all on the same level. Um, so building rapport with colleagues and clients often requires like extra effort and patience from me. Um, Misunderstandings uh, is something I kind of worry about sometimes. And that kind of happens through like technical forms of communication. So an example would be like if I said something in a conversation and I can hear the other person's tone of voice, their body language, I can assume that this person's A, either happy, B, disappointed, and C, angry, and so forth. Um, but when you use like platforms like email or text messages, it's harder to kind of decipher how they're currently feeling at the situation. And I know there's like other solutions that you can use to kind of determine whether someone's angry or not. Like there's this thing called like tone indicators, which is a relatively new thing where like it's a slash and then it's like like a small letters to represent a certain emotion. So I guess one example was slash JK, which is just kidding. That's an example of one. Um, and basically that kind of helps with like understanding whether I should take someone seriously in this situation or not. Um, yeah. So most of the issues I have are kind of related to um, communication. That's so far, half of my experience has been in person, and half of my experience so far has been remote work. Um, Currently, I'm at a staffing agency where most of my work is with agencies, but currently the work I have is remote. There's some situations where I'm working with a project manager. Other situations I'm working with a client. Um, and I think it's definitely possible to get through to have good communication in a remote setting. It really depends on like the type of technologies you really use. So for me, I would love to use like something like Slack or a workplace platform to kind of like discuss like these types of projects and such. Because when you're in email, you get like loaded with tons of like threads and such that you kind of have to search through. And that can be kind of exhausting when you're working on multiple projects at the same time. So that's a technological aspect of it. I also believe I'm a huge believer in like regular check-ins and such because I think the best type of mistakes you can make are the ones you don't bring up in like work and such. And I think like having those type of checkups prevent those from kind of happening. So, regular check-ins, um, good uses of technology platforms, those are like my main two criterias for like how um, to communicate with other people. Um, there's a that's a very broad question. I guess to make a workplace kind of like more neuro-inclusive to help me and such, it revolves around making employees also neuro-inclusive because if you can't do that, it's hard to make a company as a whole very neuro-inclusive. Um, so I guess the best thing that I can really like say is employee training. Basically, like implementing like training sessions, like educating staff about like different conditions like ADHD or autism, etc. Basically, understand different behaviors and find ways to kind of accommodate those behaviors. I think the kind of the best way to kind of like, explain all this stuff is to kind of explain it as like a culture. Because I know like many different cultures have their different forms of communication and such. Um, and if you look kind of past like the medical side of like, autism or ADHD, um, a lot of the behaviors could be seen as cultural norms. And if we teach it that way to employees, they have a better understanding of these behaviors and will be able to work with them both, in-house, but also important in like hiring practices. Um, and I think that's something that, I've also struggled with finding work is basically learning how to communicate in an interview. I know sometimes I have struggled speaking and sometimes I lose my train of thought. So I think adding, employee training to not only employees but also like human resources is very beneficial in minimizing that bias in hiring practices. Awareness. Okay. Um, so the term awareness often sparks controversy, and I don't think the concept itself is problematic. It's just the issue is how and when it is applied. I think the greatest demonstrations of like awareness is in the form of like awareness months. Like October is ADHD and dyslexia, and April's Autism Awareness Month. Um, all those bring attention and media coverage and all that, but that after those months, like all that goes away. And personally, I feel that awareness should be something that's ongoing and not just limited to specific months. We need to advocate for people all the time, not just during designated month and not just for designated months. Uh, and this can also like this is definitely true for like neurodivergent people, but for other people in cultures, for other people in cultures as well. Um, and I think the way to kind of promote that advocacy can be very difficult. There's a lot of people who don't really know about like neurodivergent conditions. A lot of people don't know a lot of neurodivergent people. And I think for those reasons, it's kind of harder to emphasize the importance of learning these types of things to those people. So to do that, I have two ideas for key solutions. One is education. Basically integrating education about neurological differences into early learning criteria. Educating children about like ADHD, autism, etc., definitely fosters a more inclusive environment in schools and workplaces. Um, and we have Generation Alpha coming in, and we're gonna have more generation of children coming in the future. We didn't really have a lot of info about these conditions back then. And because of that, we didn't have a lot of like, programs for learning about these types of stuff outside of special education. So it's kind of important to focus on that next generation children so they can take that to the workspace. And I think also another thing is also public figures. I guess highlighting public figures and celebrities with neurological conditions can definitely help with um, getting people more open-minded about learning this type of stuff. Since pop culture can like drive so much advocacy and engagement. I guess one example would be like Greta Thunberg, who was like the environmental activist. She won like Times Person of the Year, but she is on the spectrum. And I think there's also Tony Snell, who's like the NBA player, and I think he's also on the spectrum as well. So I think if you have like people like those, I think a lot of people who are unfamiliar with those conditions, but like those celebrities, would be more willing to learn more. So those are my main takeaways. Basically, just having more educational programs in early years of learning so that they can take that to the workplace, and giving more evidence of public figures who have these certain differences that allow people to become more open-minded about these types of differences. That's my best takeaway. That's a big one. Um, I was a very, risk-averse person growing up. Um, and I kind of wish I wasn't. Um, and I think like if I were to kind of go back and, kind of rethink like how I got started with like work and such, everyone makes mistakes. Um, it's just the issue is that the worst type of mistakes are the ones you don't report upon. Um, and I think like it's better to make like few smaller mistakes than one big one. Um, so I think that's what employers need to address. Like it's okay to make mistakes. It's better to make smaller mistakes than not having any at all and then having one big one. Um, that's my takeaway. Clear communication is a big factor. I like to get like a lot of info from like other people. That kind of helps with like, getting through projects, making sure we hit all our KPIs and such. Visual learning is also a big thing for me. And making visual end products is a huge thing. I'm not someone who, really is, language proficient. Like I said before, I have trouble speaking and such. And I think visual evidence of like projects and such has allowed me to come overcome those barriers. So I definitely recommend looking into ways to communicate like projects whenever you're doing like presentations such in a way that speak more than words. Um, yeah, those are like my main two. I'm still very early, I guess, in my career to kind of decide like what accommodations do I really need. Because it really depends like the type of person. Uh, I so far I haven't had like a lot of accommodations back then. But I guess one of my quirks is that I'm kind of like a fidgety person. I'm someone who likes to kind of move around and stretch, and I think there's a lot of workplaces that so far that have allowed that flexibility, which is really good. I guess like the greatest example is like one of the places I worked at was a shared workspace where like it wasn't just them in the office. It was like different companies and they like different like spaces they can use where people can kind of sit and like work. So it's kind of nice to have that opportunity to use that facility rather than like being stuck in a cubicle all day doing this one specific thing. Uh, and it definitely helps with like being focused and such. So most of it's like environmental accommodations. Like I know for some people, fluorescent light can be kind of straining and can like decrease like productivity and such. I can't tell in my personal experience that fluorescent light has affected my um, focus, but I feel like, there's some times where like sunlight is very beneficial for me. I know usually on like rainy days where it's like super cloudy and such, I don't get like a lot of like, energy to kind of get through the day. My mood's a little less than perfect. And other things that kind of help me with that is like light therapy. I have like a therapy light that I put in my room sometimes during like rainy days to kind of simulate like real sunlight. And it's not 100% perfect, but it does help. So yeah, most of the situations I had with like workplace accommodations were mostly related to environmental accommodations. I think I touched on this previously, But from my experience from like sensory input and such, most of my experiences have been like as a child, like I was sensitive to loud noise. Um, I'm not good with flashing lights. But I think as I kind of grow older, I kind of grow out of those, but there's also other sensory issues that I kind of deal with personally. Uh, I have a lot of like issues with like movement and such. Like I think the biggest issue for me is like when I'm on like an airplane and such, I definitely feel like, taking off, landing, the plane turning, which I can really feel the turning. Um, these are my experiences, and not everyone's gonna have like the same thing. Um, but I think for me, it's important to have more of an understanding of sensory input and how it kind of impacts like work in the workplace. Um, I think a huge thing is that I'm a really big fan of like, quiet. And it's definitely gets kind of distracting, like, hearing like other people when like I'm in a very like congested environment. So usually I sometimes there used to be like really private cubicles I like to go in for like an hour or so, just to kind of allow me kind of like focus on like one task and such. Um, I like, sometimes I like to wear headphones, um, and just listen to music, which kind of like, removes like I'm able to kind of like focus on like, the work at hand rather than just what's going on around me. I think that's also very helpful. Um, so yeah, it really depends on like who's working and what type of sensory inputs they have that are very sensitive. And that's my takeaway.